and welcome to the Harnham Group's Data and AI podcast. My name is Waseem Ali. I am the CEO of Rockborn, one of the companies within the Harnham Group, and I am super excited to have James Robson here with us today, an industry leader in the space of data protection. Formerly, until the end of last year, he was the data protection officer at the Labour Party. And what a topic to be talking about in the wonderful world of data and AI and generative AI today as well. So I've been really looking forward to this podcast, James. Perhaps you can start us off and just give us an overview of yourself, your career, and so on.
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. Thank you so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. Yeah, I mean, I've been in data protection for about 10 years now. And before that, in fact, I was in cybersecurity sales, infrastructure sales. And before that, I was in television, working. The biggest gig I had there was with Homes Under the Hammer for BBC One. Bit of a dark past in the TV world. But yeah, I started off in late 2016. Early 2017, where people didn't really know what the GDPR was, the General Data Protection Regulation. I was one of those kind of early jump on the bandwagon consultants. And from there, I spent a number of years in consultancy, kind of delivering that the good old gap analysis, the maturity analysis to understand where you are, where do you need to get to, how to become compliant. And then we had the whole wave of millions of consent requests for privacy policies around about 2018, and then I've sort of moved around a little bit. I went to a large psychometric testing firm, or the largest global firm, called SHL Limited, before moving on to become DPO for something called the Evidence Quarter. So that was in research, and really enjoyed my time there. Really felt like I could add some value because of data protection, which is one of those rare things. Everyone thinks it's all about consent and sort of hates it, but then I could give back a little bit, and then I found my way to the Labour Party in 2023. So did a year before and a year after of the UK general election in 2024. Only stepped out on my own to build my company, Datum Longevitus, towards the end of last year, because I felt there's a gap and a need in research and charities to have top quality data protection, and also a data sharing ecosystem, and to become a data sharing service provider, actually managing platforms on behalf of organizations that want to share data compliantly. I really think that's a big thing, especially with AI, needing to harvest a lot of data, but how do you do that compliantly? So yeah, that's me in a nutshell for the last decade or so.
Absolutely fantastic, and congratulations on your new business as well. It's a really
Thank you.
exciting time to be setting up something in this kind of space as well. So congratulations, and I'm sure we'll talk more on that in the future as well. Now, there's a lot to unpack in your intro, because there's such a rich kind of history and lots of experience there across the value chain of data. But I must start with the Labour Party and your role there and stuff as well. I wonder if you can just kind of give me a bit of a overview of the role that you played, especially in line with quite a high pressured environment, I imagine, in the 2024 elections. Kind of what was the part that you were playing there, and then kind of how was it like? Obviously, only share the information you can, but that's quite a unique position to be in. And what was that like?
Yeah, it certainly was unique in many ways. I mean, there are not that many people that get to be a data protection officer for a political party. Yeah, a highly pressured environment, but it is about looking after the data and making sure it's being used in the right way. And, political parties, they have a copy of the electoral register, so 42 million records there. How do you manage that? What are databases? What new systems and services that you are pushing out for your MPs and for your candidates and for your local constituency parties to have access to that, to do campaigning and things, and how do you log all that, and is that compliant? And then there's the membership database, which is, wavers around, the numerous hundreds of thousands of people on that. And then there's supporters, and so you've got your marketing databases. And then, are we telling the right people the right things on the websites, and what are all the web locations, and what are the interesting things that we need to do with data to run ourselves? So yeah, I mean, it's highly pressured because lots of people want to do lots of things with lots of data. I mean, that's the best way of describing it. The whole focus of a political party is to get into power and then retain power. And if you're lucky enough to get into government, then it sort of shifts and changes. So I didn't necessarily have an input into the government departments. It's more the party and that structure. But I got in there thinking, I'd get to learn about lots of things, which of course I did, and walk into a bit of a world of work where they hadn't had a data protection officer for a couple of years. I mean, statutorily they have to have one, and they'd had a data breach back in 2021. You can look this stuff up. Thankfully, before my time, but that they had some challenges around responses to people around that breach, especially things like data subject access requests. Please give me a copy of my data, and then deletion requests. And there was an ICO, Information Commissioner's Office, the regulator investigation around that was open. So I just walked into a whole world of work, and about 2,000 of these data subject access requests immediately. Yeah, so it was a lot to get my head around. I mean, as you may know, especially in recruitment, whenever you start a new role, it's about 3 to 6 months of learning a big organization and get settled. But that was a real trial by fire. I mean, they had 3 open ICO investigations as soon as I walked in, with numerous thousands of these rights requests. So my job was go where there were things burning and currently on fire, rather than even the day to day. And there were, there was an inbox that was jammed up tight, so it's a bit like unpacking a fully loaded Tetris screen, and working through that as best I can, whilst also still trying to put processes in place, because it had eroded over time. But yeah, fascinating to be in there and speak to the people. I mean, you report to the highest levels of management within the party as a data protection officer. You do anyway in any organization as a DPO. So yeah, very privileged role, but very pressured. There's only one person doing it, myself, and lots of early mornings, lots of late nights, lots of weekends, in fact, to try and turn the ship so it became more compliant, and had a professionalism to it as well. When I got there in 2023, it was really in a stage of professionalization. They were hiring people from industry rather than just political career people. So people had only known kind of politics and the party. And that was really exciting. They'd hired they'd had lots of investment, lots of donation, and they were hiring some really experienced people as well. So I was learning tons from them. And also, I hadn't worked in politics before. I hadn't been politically active either. I just knew at that time we didn't want a conservative government, and this was my way to be a cog in the machine, but do my bit. And so my aim was really, don't get them fired, get them compliant, don't get them fined, get them compliant, and then improve the entirety of their data protection and data privacy in the entirety of the party. It was quite a thing. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting as you talk about it, right? Because actually, although it's a political party, it's a party that came into power, and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of kind of correlation just to the role of a DPO in any organization, or large organization, right? And what you emphasized in your answer there was the kind of marriage between uh, value. So actually, what's going to get, in your example, the Labour Party into power and so on and so forth, versus actually keeping them compliant, right? And often the role of a DPO, and I know we spoke about this before, the role of a DPO is actually seen as almost a blocker. and oh no, we're going to stop you doing this, we're going to stop you doing that. But actually, it can be an enabler in a lot of ways as well. And how do you tackle that as a leader in this space? How do you tackle the bridge between kind of, I guess, people like me who want to innovate and want to go after it versus actually doing it in a compliant and safe way? What's kind of your view on that, and what would you advise organizations to think about when they are trying to innovate versus doing it in the
Yeah, it's something that comes up time and time again. I mean, I think a good data protection officer will understand how things work and how things need to work. So ends up not being a blocker in our minds, but in most other people's minds, it usually is. And they're worried that maybe they're doing something or done something. And, I come on, plenty of calls where people are apologetic. Oh, we've done this. Is it okay? And the truth around it is it within the expectation of the individual whose data you're using? Have you told them, and have you gone through, the compliance checklist, if you like? Maybe you need to do a risk assessment. But for me, it's never been a don't do. It's always a how to, but how to do it right.
developer?
I was speaking at the IAPP conference, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, earlier this year, and one of the keynotes there made a really good analogy around, well, the question is, why do you have brakes on cars? You don't have brakes on cars for them to go slower. You have brakes on cars for them to go faster, because if you just kept your foot on the accelerator without a brake, you're probably going to die. It's almost the same, not necessarily you're going to die if you use personal data in the wrong way, but you may get a fine, or you may be fired, or you may be having some regulatory conversations, some regulator
Reputational risk,
conversations.
all of those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, all those kinds of things. So how do you approach that? Well, you go through the checklist. How do you tell people? Do you tell people what you're doing with their data at the right time? Do they expect you, as any organization, to use your data in the right way? I mean, if I said to people on the electoral register, we're going to try and sell you tractors, well, they may think that's not the right thing for a political party to do. I mean, that's obvious. But then if we said we would like to build a bit of a profile around you to understand whether or not you're going to vote a certain way, and we're also going to come and knock on your door and do some campaigning around that, well, that probably is in your expectation. That's probably what you do think a political party would do with data. So if you fall into that category of doing what's within the expectation of the individual, then you're probably on the right side of it, and it becomes quite an ethical conversation, rather than even necessarily hitting the specific notes around the GDPR, because the GDPR is quite flexible. UK GDPR in the UK and the Data Protection Act of 2018. The things it really specifies is, if you're hitting a criteria that says, it might be high risk if you are using data in this way, an innovative technology like AI, do a risk assessment. If you're using children's data, if you're using vulnerable adults data, if you are using high volumes of data for a specific activity, do a risk assessment. And the risk assessment is the mapping of that project or that use of the personal data. It's who's using it, who are you sharing it with, why are you sharing it with them, how are you doing that in a secure manner, do you update your firewalls and do your patching correctly? It asks those questions. Where geographically is that data going to reside when you shared it with someone? And then there are further geographic rules that you have to abide, and maybe another transfer risk assessment or transfer impact assessment, depending on which acronym you use. So as long as you go through the checklist, there's generally not much you're not allowed to do, as long as it's within the expectations of the individual. And that's the key, really. And I always look at that first. I look for, how do we get this done in the way that you want it, rather than just saying no. It's more likely the person that's trying to do it thinks they can't. And that's where the beauty comes into the role that I have.
I love the thing that you started off with is it's not don't do, it's how to, and I think that's a really good way of describing it. And I think actually when you're landing in a big organization in a role like yours, it's not only about coming in and putting the policies and processes in place, which obviously really important, but it's about actually educating the business on the role that you're playing and how you can support in that. I'm is that one of the biggest challenges in for data protection officers then is to kind of support the organization culturally? I assume, I don't want to oversimplify the role, but like with anything, you can go in and you can typeset the policies and you can put those things in, but actually understanding the business outcome, to your point, winning the business over culturally, is that one of your biggest challenges in a role like this?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and that's absolutely right. Winning the business over is the absolute key to being, I think, a good data protection professional. You have to build those relationships. You have to have those interpersonal skills, and you have to be confident enough to get yourselves into those conversations. This thing is happening over here. They may not necessarily think that you should be in the room, and they may think that you may be the data protection police when you are in the room. So you've got to really calm that down and then persuade them that you should be in the room, because you can allow them to do what they want to do, rather than them thinking, oh, we're getting one past the DPO. It's like if that's the culture, then it's absolutely the wrong the wrong culture. Turning the ship is hard. There is no two ways about it, but you need to understand the data flows within your organization to then go and isolate the departments and the people that you go and have to make friends with, and then ask them a bit more about things. And if they feel like they're being grilled, then they absolutely will kind of clam up and, not help you. But if they think you're there to help them and then can give them some value and say, oh, that thing you're doing, that consent that you think you need to get, for example, you don't need to get that. Don't worry about that. And they're like, oh, we built this whole thing. That would be so much easier if we don't have to do that. I'm like, there, you don't need to do that. And then they see you as helping them and then reducing workload. Because I think people do overthink this. If you don't have a specialist working with you, and yeah, that it's likely to be over-engineered. It's likely to be, non-compliant on paper, although feels like it's the right thing to do to get that extra consent, for example, or have that extra bit of information.
Yeah.
But it's also likely you've got a professional in there reading it, going like, yeah, I'm not sure you know what you're doing, but
It's interesting. I've got a few friends that are in this space, and actually, what one of them who's a seasoned DPO said, actually success for him in terms of culture, is always being invited to, if a new project is kicking off, being invited to the initiation as opposed to being seen as an afterthought, because actually he's like, if you think about the journey of a project, if I'm invited from get-go, then I could be like, actually, don't worry, to your point, don't worry about these things, that's all fine, it's within our policy. Actually, there's the thing, I'll dive in a little bit further onto that, don't worry about that for now. Whereas actually, if he gets brought in as an afterthought, someone in that project meeting, like, you can imagine saying, oh, you want to bring in, let's say, Bob, you want to bring in Bob into the meeting because sounds like personal data and stuff. And he's like, almost, if you get into the meeting at that point in time, people are pitching to you because the project has already started and money has already been spent. So he's like, actually, success for me is always when people bring me in quite early on to any sort of project and stuff. So it's quite interesting in that space. And I guess, please.
yeah, no, I completely resonate with that. It's absolutely right. I mean, there's the phrase, there's no such thing as a stupid question. In fact, I love the stupid questions, because that's where somebody is double checking and they feel like it's okay to double check, and they feel supported rather than that they're going to get a telling off. And I try to position myself as a person that will also kind of add ideas into the mix of a new project as well, so I can be helpful. So because they're then thinking, yes, we need the DPO in, but the DPO understands all of our systems, maybe more than most people, which is actually what you do need to do that. You need to know more than your marketing team, than your HR team, than your product development team. You have this wider picture, and you can probably bring some more value by going, well, have you thought about this team over here? Because there's this thing here that does connect to that. And oftentimes they're like, oh no, but that's really good. I'm glad that we have that. So thinking of it in that way, getting into the room as early as possible, absolutely, and then having people being encouraged to reach out to you and just ask the silliest little thing. And often the people saying, or people who are the loudest are saying, oh, sorry if this is a silly question. Strangely, because they're willing to reach out, they're often not the people I'm worried about.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not the people that will keep me awake
Yeah.
at night. It will be the one thinking, oh, I already know this, or it's like a seasoned developer that is in a role for 20 years. I don't need to have a DPO. I know GDPR. I can do this myself. And those are the ones I do worry about, because there will be the nuance in there, that so almost the bit of code that's been written, that if that breaks, the whole thing breaks. It's the same with data protection. And if you leave it too late, there's this little bit where they're like, we're going to launch tomorrow. Let's check with the DPO on the morning. And then I'm likely to be the blocker. I'm like, yeah, you can't launch today because this isn't right. And I've got to spend a lot of time doing that work, or maybe even an overnight. That's happened before. Yeah.
It's the same like it's the same like with finance, right? Like if you initiate an entire project, but kind of and get to the point of payment for that particular product or platform, if you went to the CFO last minute, the CFO, he, she, they are lucky to say, hold up a second, let's dive into it. It's the same with the DPO, right? So no one would even think about doing that in the world of finance and so on and so forth. And I think actually there's a big cultural change in and I think it's happening in larger organizations anyway, in moving people into the mindset of bringing data around the table, data protection around the table from get-go. I wanted to dive into one of your points that you mentioned in the previous answer around kind of AI and the importance of data protection in AI a little bit. So since you started in the in the world of data protection, obviously a lot has changed in terms of actually rolling out GDPR initiatives, getting the right training, so on and so forth, almost in its infancy to now in a world where I'm not saying AI is new. AI has been around for a very, very long time, but the generative AI capabilities for businesses is a relatively new kind of technology process that organizations are implementing. What have you seen that's changed since the introduction of generative AI in businesses, and what are you seeing changing in the space of data protection in that world?
Yeah, I mean, since AI has basically become ubiquitous and embedded, and especially even embedded into the bigger platforms, with encouragement to use things like Gemini and Copilot, Microsoft and Google, and then ChatGPT having a lot of publicity and spending lots of money and things. It's the encouragement for individuals to innovate on their own without oversight, and that's a big worry, because hey, that's great. Efficiency, speed things up, write things or policies or images or videos, but not only do we get into the argument of where's the crossover between data protection and intellectual property, and also the rights of the individual and their copyrights, so copyright law. So there's been a big crossover there. Where does that sit with people? But it's again, where is the data, and are you allowed to upload it to this LLM? Is it things like, is it a corporate purchased instance of it? Have you paid for the service, is what I'm trying to say in a bad way. Have you paid for the service as an organization, or are you paying for it yourself because it's speeding up your day job? And I come back to something a while back where somebody I was working for reached out for some help, because there was a clinician that they'd employed that was using ChatGPT to diagnose patients with information that they were gathering from them. and then just copy and pasting without checking that, and then send it back to the patient. I mean, that's horrendous. And if people are using, personal data about people, even if it's their opinion, which is also personal data, to come to a conclusion about them and then make decisions on that information because it's been generated by an AI, you get into some serious legal troubles there, because not only is it automated decision making, which is within the UK GDPR and EU GDPR is something that you need to tell people you're doing with their data. Do they know you're going to use an LLM or some other large model to make a decision on them in the first place? Again, transparency with the individual. Do they expect you to do it? Is the individual themselves allowed to use this LLM? Is it within corporate policy? So are you then breaking internal corporate policy? And by doing that, you're probably breaching company confidentiality and your own employment contract of confidentiality by doing that. You are causing a data breach by doing that. So, I just lean on the things that are already embedded in data protection law. It's a bit of a nightmare. There is education now. I mean, it's been a while since it's really started to become prevalent. I think the last year or so, it's really become enormous, and AI embedded into everything.
And you'll see real use cases as well now as well.
You are, yeah. A really good one that I've worked on recently has been a chatbot to help a local council be able to help the residents find information about not becoming homeless, how to get out of certain situations. So trained on the information from government, from Citizens Advice Bureau and then they notified all the people in their database that they thought could be, had flags, not even red flags, just flags around. These are the markers around people that we think could end up homeless if something happened in their circumstances. Push this access to this chatbot. It was called Housing Helper, in fact. And they had 400 people access it, use it, and there's a research project on working out, are those people that used it then popping up on the local authority databases to see whether or not they are reaching out for help or not, and then trying to track whether it was helpful. So, that's just one example. So there are good things popping up, yeah.
Huge. And actually, you know what? Obviously, commercial businesses are looking at ways of saving time, cost, and so on and so forth. But when you hear about examples like that, I mean, it really excites me. Related to healthcare, related to homelessness, it's a really good example to go into. But if I dive into that particular example, I think it's how do you even start with that? Because I think it's a real balance between, my goodness, this can really, really help people, versus actually it can almost do the opposite if not the data is not used properly, or there's a leak, or there's an incident, and so on and so forth. So how do you manage that in the kind of role of data protection, and where does the ethical considerations come into play when thinking about things like this as well?
Yeah, I think those are key questions and the right ones to ask. So let's take the hypothetical scenario, and that's what data protection is about as well. What's the hypothetical scenario where something could go wrong and harm could be caused to the individual? Harm being a loss of consequential services. So let's say consequential services, maybe they receive a benefit, a housing payment benefit. They use this chatbot that's been implemented on behalf of the local council. What would be most worrying is they put something in there. It reads like they're defrauding the local council. Local council get wind of it, and then they cut their benefit. But all they've done is written something incorrectly into the prompt. They're not actually, so where are the false positives? Could that affect someone? And so, with those scenarios, like, at what point does the local council need to be aware of the individual that is using it? Arguably, they don't. And then you go, okay, what's the other end of the argument? When would the local council want to know or should know? Well, what if they report domestic violence? or sexual harassment or child abuse through this LLM, isn't there a responsibility for the local council to step in and actually take action if it hits the right notes there? So this is a lot of this is, yes, contractual based. Then it's also only allowing access if there are the correct flags within prompts within the output of the LLM, but having the, dare I say it, human in the loop to check if it hits that threshold, somebody checks it, who is a professional, and they are not allowed to pass that on unless they, in their professional opinion, feels it does hit that threshold, then pass it on, and then you can reach out. So what are the checks and balances? One is, where is the prompt going? Who has access to it, the prompt and the outputs? Is the prompt itself, location of the server, the service being used, maybe the underpinning AI that's been trained to deliver the output? What's the security mechanisms around that? Is it, yet again, a purchased service and not just, an open, I say open AI, but I don't mean the company, just an open AI chatbot that anyone can get access to. So checking those balances, but yeah, access, timings of access, metadata. So metadata being the log of how the data was used and how it was accessed. So you can check back the logs. So if something happens and, you have the individual hit the threshold, it's reviewed by someone, it goes to the council reaches back out, and that person's not happy, and then they complain. Yes, we've got the new complaints process that every organization has to have because of the Data Use and Access Act before they go to the regulator. They may still not be happy with the output, but can the local council go, we did all the checks and balances in this way, in the right way, we feel we have a precedence to be able to reach out to you to check to see if somebody needs protection. Protecting, not even the data side of it, actually protecting from harm. Maybe they still go to the Information Commissioner's office. Can the organization or that local authority in this example justify every step was done correctly to the regulator and not just go, well, yeah, it's an automatic decision made by a chatbot, and so we just took the decision to reach out without verifying it. The regulator is not going to look kindly upon that and then want to ask more. So yes, it's right back down to, it's not a don't do, it's a how-to. The how-to is, where's the logs, where's the metadata, where's the person that is doing the checks, and do you have a lawful basis in place to be able to do that? Because the lawful basis originally, it's probably not consent. You don't need consent for using an information gathering tool, and you probably don't necessarily need consent for hitting that threshold for somebody to reach out and try and protect somebody else from harm. It's vital interest is the lawful basis. So do you have that in place? That would be the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the human in the loop bit, I know there's lots of kind of, everyone's talking about human in the loop, human augmentation and so on and so forth. But I think it's so important, especially when actually you're in a space where this technology is evolving literally on a weekly basis. I think having the human in the loop is so important. I go back to 20 years ago when I started my career, and actually we were building really mild scale automations for our clients in like archaic coding technology, right? And actually when you did that, like you would set up the automation, but you would review, check again, only when you started becoming confident with the output would you start scaling back. That's adding the human in the loop, right? And then actually you would still put some sort of audit process around it. Even when you were 99% confident, you would still put an audit process around it to ensure that it was doing the right things. The data structure wasn't changing, the data types weren't changing, whatever, right? So I think it's so important in that. I think your example is such a valuable one, right? And I think there's a lot that you covered there around kind of the process that you put into place, the justification, if a complaint was to be raised with the ICO, and all of those kind of things. How do you in your role balance what is policy, so i.e. what you should be doing, versus the kind of ethical concerns or ethical considerations? Because that's kind of like, how do you define ethics? Is it the right thing to do, and so on? But that's very individual to an organization. So what role would you play in helping the local authority in this case, or an organization, in understanding their kind of ethical stance on stuff? And how would you work through that? That could be a podcast on,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. No, it's a fair question, because I think most data protection officers do sort of see themselves as an ethical check rather than even a data protection legal compliance check. I go back to my early days in Labour, and they were thinking of using an AI tool that's brand new. It's called PIM Eyes. If you look at PIM Eyes, I think they've had some problems with regulators around Europe for harvesting facial recognition data. And what Labour had wanted to do was, make that process easier and scan the web for people's faces to be able to know who are trying to become members, because you don't want members of other parties or people in your membership list. But are you allowed to look for them on the open internet and web using this enormous facial recognition tool? Who knows if that's compliant or legal? And although there's not really any advice back then on that kind of thing, my take on it was, well, no, that's ethically wrong. You should not do that. That's not the right use of an AI technology, especially with this supplier that I don't think they even have the privacy notice. Couldn't explain how they did their things anyway. That's where I use data protection as a blocker. To say, well, you're going to have to jump through so many hoops, it's not worth your time doing it. Even though, could I've gotten around it? Could I've given them the risk? I'd still said high risk, but you can make the choice. I don't dictate things. Organizations still make the choice. We're just DPOs are just advisory, in fact. So the ethics argument is really interesting. Is there going to be any actual harm coming to an individual? And that is what goes through my mind in every data protection impact assessment, the risk assessment that I do. Over and above everything else, over and above the risks to the organization, is there any harm? Maybe again, back to the whole, will it stop any consequential services being able to be accessed by the individual? What does that mean? Any physical or emotional harm or distress that could come to the individual? That's the benchmark actually we work from. So yeah, call us ethicists or not, probably not so much, but most DPOs end up falling into that bucket by default, and you end up with a bunch of people that are actually really, really lovely people. One, because you have to be, otherwise nobody's going to tell you the bad stuff, and number two, all they're looking for is how will this cause harm? What's the level of risk to that level of harm? Lots of stuff is just super low risk. It's never really going to cause anyone harm or distress. If there's a rogue e-commerce organization that is harvesting data from the internet and sending emails 5 times a day, yeah, you're going to annoy a lot of people, maybe even cause anxiety in a lot of people. They didn't sign up. How do they know about me? Where did they get my data from? There's spam in my inbox. It's like an email DDoS attack, denial of service attack. There's so many emails, I can't even use my emails. That's going to cause distress. So what are the checks and balances in there around how it could cause harm, anxiety, distress, emotional distress, physical harm, those kinds of things? We always think that.
There's so much to unpack, isn't it? Like when it comes to that stuff. Gosh, we're fast running out of time here, James, as I thought we would in terms of this conversation. And what I thought would be a good idea to do, actually, and I've just made it up on the spot, so you're not expecting this, is ask some really quick fire questions. Just I don't know, I'll make them up on the spot, right? So a few quick fire questions in terms of advice for users, and then we'll kind of close with a bit of a wrap up, right? So quick fire questions for maybe data leaders or businesses out there, right, in the space of AI. So question one, right? So you spoke about LLMs and AIs and Copilots, ChatGPTs, etc. Right? So for an organization, if they're rolling out or if they're looking to leverage the capabilities of generative AI through any of the big vendors, what's the first thing you would tell them to do?
Purchase a license.
Okay. Next question. If they purchase a license, are they automatically protected from their data being leaked outwards?
No. Make sure the settings are correct to how you are telling people you are using the data. So the next thing would be, do the settings match your privacy notice? Because the privacy notice is your external facing document for what you're telling people you're using their data for. Do those match? And is it within that remit? Do you need to update your privacy notice, for example? So the settings will be things like, well, which geographic location is the data being held? Do I need to tweak that, or does that match what I'm already telling people? Are there any further security settings? Is there a type of data that you do not want it to be trained, that you do not want to have the LLM trained on? Right, that's probably the next big thing is, are you allowing the LLM to do wider training on your data, as in to use it in its own model outside of your system? And usually there's a toggle in there in the settings say, yes, we allow the AI system to train on my data for its own growth and use. Usually you shouldn't do that. Make
Yeah.
sure that's off.
Okay. Interesting. I was pulling up questions that I've been asked recently in workshops that I deliver and
Yeah.
stuff as well. So it would be interesting to get your take. If an organization, this isn't about the vendor itself, but it's an interesting one. If an organization is a 365 Microsoft house, should they automatically default to Copilot, and is it automatically secure outside of the box?
It's not. No matter what they say, you should definitely do a review. I mean, who do you want to use Copilot? I think is one. I mean, if it is an efficiency tool, again, what are the parameters of use, and make sure you're really clear on that. What are you allowing to upload to it or not? Is it iterating on the data? Is it training on the data for its own purposes? What's the length of time it's going to hold the data, and where is that data being held as well? You've got to ask the retention question, and why, and can you delete it, and is there a policy? I think you definitely need some policy. You need some training. You need a friendly either data protection officer or AI officer to do that training, tell people what they're allowed to upload or not. It's still murky, it's still a difficult question.
It's evolving.
And it's
Everything's
evolving.
right?
I mean, no, but make sure you have the right parameters in place.
Yeah. Okay. Last couple of kind of quick fire questions. What's the single biggest mistake you are seeing organizations make right now when it comes to data protection, AI, or any of those things? The one top mistake that you see in organizations when you go in?
And not asking for advice.
Okay.
I think people like lack of friction. You put more friction in place, they're going to click the OK for cookies. Get into the habit of always clicking no, or only the necessary cookies, for example. So yeah, there's not enough advice being sought from the professionals that can do that can guide people, and therefore I think there's going to be a bit of a proliferation of breaches popping up around AI.
Yeah. Okay. And last one, your single piece of advice to any new data leader going into an organization where governance or protection is seen as an afterthought. What's the one thing you would say to them to do?
That's a tough one. I mean, we talked about bringing your data protection person into the conversation as early as possible. Make them a friend, have them sit there. Their job is not to tell you what to do. It's just to guide you on how to be compliant and use the data in an ethical way. Make them your friend and bring them into the conversation. I think that's it. They're like, let's equate a DPO to your friendly AI LLM sitting there watching what you're doing and going, we can make this more efficient in this way. We can make this more compliant in that way. dare I say there'll be data protection LLMs that are doing that. Unfortunately, the ones I've seen so far aren't so great. So don't do that with an AI, but use your DPO as a physical AI, a person AI. So bizarre to look at it in that
Yeah.
the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. James, this has been such a great conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk us through it. And sorry to put you on the spot with some of those quick fire questions as well. Hopefully they weren't too bad.
That was
I
great.
guess in your world, in the world of kind of the business that you're setting up and stuff as well, what's something that you would like to share in terms of advice for people if they want to get started? What are good resources to look at? What would be kind of your kind of closing remarks on this?
Yeah, so I think there needs to be more data shared for one, societal benefit, but also innovation. And there is a couple of problems currently. There's lots of siloed data, lots of duplicated data, where there could be a far easier way and reduce carbon footprint, reduce the amount of servers, a single point of that data, an accessibility to that data, but from one organization, maybe an intermediary. So the trusted data intermediaries are going to be very big in the future. Everyone seems worried about the data brokers for good reason, but there will be a different type of broker, which is this intermediary that is saying we can access this data from here, already have the consent or whatever mechanism required from the data subject, and then you can have access to that and use of that. So watch out for that new world, because it will mean you're spending less on storage. It will mean you're reducing your cloud infrastructure, if you even have any in-house anymore. So that world is coming, and it will be all about data sharing. But what is the compliance around that, and what new tools do you need to have in place? So what I'm trying to do is build that ecosystem and infrastructure around those new tools, which will literally protect the individual and the company from each other, and then still allow the company to use the data in the right way without having to store it, without having to kind of pay the extra money on the uses of that data in their own way. So that was a very long-winded way to say what I'm passionate about, but data sharing is going to be all the in thing through an intermediary fairly soon.
Absolutely, and I think the more people are sharing through the medium of podcasts, blogs, whatever it may be, the more educated people get.
Yeah,
Right, actually,
yeah.
it's all about kind of education and in this space and this changing space as well. You know what? Anyone listening to this podcast, this is probably a 30-40 minute masterclass in how to get started. I would say it's so knowledgeable in terms of the insights that you've provided, in
Thank you.
terms of your tips, the things to look out for. I wish you nothing but the best in your business. I'm sure we're going to be talking lots more. It's a topic that's very close to my heart. So thank you again for taking the time, and just to say thank you to our listeners for listening to Harnham's Data and AI podcast. Stay tuned for more great guests, and thanks again, James, and speak soon.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode, brought to you by the Harnham Group. We'd love it if you would share the podcast on social media and leave a comment or a review to help us reach a bigger audience. If your company is having difficulty finding skilled data professionals, you can rely on the global leader in data and analytics recruitment, staffing and talent development to assist you with your hiring needs. Find out more at www.harnham.com. Thank you for listening.